All right. There we go. What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to each and every one of you. It is Wednesday, the 18th. So I have to sort of give the date before we start so that everyone knows when they're watching this live stream that it is the 18th. So anything that happens after the 18th, it's also 12 o'clock in the afternoon at the moment. So it's literally in midday. I believe that this is something like 6 o'clock on the eastern seaboard of America, and probably like 4 o'clock and eventually 2 o'clock in the western, on the western coast of America. In Europe, it would be either 1 or 2 hours before or after this. But fundamentally, it's midday. So anything that happens after this, anything that transpires at 4 o'clock this afternoon, will not be relevant to our conversations today. We are only talking about what we know at this moment in time. I only say that because we're going to have some geopolitical conversations. We're going to talk about Iran. We're going to talk about the war and how that war is progressing. There's some fears that I want to highlight about modern warfare and where we are as a society in dealing with modern warfare. I mean, there's just a broader conversation that we have to have about South Africa and what exactly, or maybe I should say, what the hell is the ANC up to? Paul, how you doing, bro? Rivial, how you doing? Or Rivi, how you doing? Christine, how you doing? I hope you're doing very, very well. All of you, thank you so much for joining me. Remember, your conversation, your comments, they matter because this is me why I do the live streams, so that we can hang out and I can sort of get your opinion on a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. Henku, how you doing, sir? CR, how you doing? I hope all of you are well. Okay, so first things first, let's just quickly get one thing out of the way. How is the war in Iran actually going at the moment? How are things progressing in Iran between America and Israel attacking Iran, and then of course Iran, by all accounts have been completely decimated. Most of their missiles have been destroyed. The vast majority of their production capability of new missiles have been destroyed. We also now know that a lot of their production on drones have been severely dismantled and destroyed as well. And so Iran, by all accounts, at least the official reports that we have, they're on their last sort of munitions. There's literally not much left for this regime. And whatever they do have left, they're now sort of only using on the Strait of Hormuz, which is important because the Strait of Hormuz is basically Iran's final sort of leverage. If they lose the Strait of Hormuz, if the Strait were to open tomorrow, Iran basically is a sitting duck. America can do whatever it wants, Israel can do whatever it wants, and Iran would have no power. So their idea right now is to create as much economic turmoil as is possible in the world so as to force the United States to rethink their efforts. Because Iran, and I genuinely believe this, based on all of the available reports, Iran knows that if this war continues for the next month, the regime will be so weakened that the people will be in a position to overthrow them, and they will quite literally have no way of stopping that anymore. So their only hope now is to make the price of this war so expensive as to effectively get America and Israel to back off. America, as of now, has not shown any real interest in backing off. Why would you? You're already winning. And there's something interesting that we're going to be talking about in a second here, because there's also a lot of misinformation. A lot of misinformation that is out there. And this is sort of one of my fears. If you guys remember a few days ago, or a few streams ago, I should say, we had a conversation about AI. And if this war, and specifically the war in Gaza, taught me anything, it's that we should be more afraid of AI than what we are. And I don't mean taking jobs or anything like that. That's a genuine fear, and that's probably something that people far smarter than me can discuss. I'm not an expert on AI in any sense of the word, unless we're talking about AI in games, in which case I would call myself an expert. I've played a lot of games in my life, so I know how that stuff works. But what AI has done, and this is genuinely, I think, very, very interesting. Anton, how you doing, bro? Tian, how you doing? Nixters, how you doing? I think the first thing that we have to immediately throw off of ourselves is this idea that we used to live in a truthful society. That's just not true. The society has never been truthful, right? We have always lived in a world where those above us have told lies to those below. And we have always lived in a world where certain narratives were used in order to get all of us on board with a war or in order to get all of us off board for a war. The narratives have always been utilized, but in the past, the narratives did serve a viable patriotic function. You see, in the past, during Vietnam, or during the Second World War, or during the First Gulf War, the narratives and the people who set the narratives was effectively the mainstream media. And so they were able to get the entire population on board with the war. And so everyone is behind the war because all of the news and the sources that they get tells them that this is a just and a good war. Now, we can argue whether or not the war in Vietnam was a just and good war. I would argue the reasons for the war was probably mostly just. The way the war was fought absolutely makes it one of the most evil wars America ever started. And it all comes back to Agent Orange, a herbicide that was used in order to destroy the canopy of the Vietnam forests so that they could kill the insurgents, because the insurgents was using the canopy to hide from planes, and so it made it very difficult for the Americans to actually fight the communist terrorists on behalf of the government, the at that point official government of Vietnam. And so Agent Orange was employed. The problem for Agent Orange was that it not only killed all of the plants and made the soil so that nothing would grow on it, but it also happened to severely affect humans. And so you had a bunch of people being born with incredible defects. You had a bunch of children being stillborn, and people died of all sorts of cancers and stuff. And of course, the companies that made Agent Orange just denied that any of this ever happened. But none of that would become public knowledge until much later, right? Much later. The American public had no idea, because the people who actually sold them the war were under express orders not to reveal crap like that, right? Not to reveal crap like that. So what it did was it did unite the country behind a single goal and a single mission. Now, you could say, well, the Vietnam War proves that that was a really bad thing. But then we could compare it to the Second World War. Were there atrocities committed during the Second World War by the Allies? The British, the Germans, the French, the Dutch. Did they commit atrocities? The answer is yes. Did the Allies the Allies, because it was the Axis and the Allies, did the Allies kill civilians in the Second World War? The answer is absolutely. As they were bombarding and moving into these towns, oftentimes the only answer was to mortar the living hell out of these towns. And yes, civilians died as a result of it. But none of us would argue that the Second World War was a bad idea, right? And so, yes, the people were kept in the dark about a lot of the bad stuff that the government was doing, but at the same time, this was necessary, because you needed the entire nation to be on board in order to kill this incredible evil that had risen out of Germany in the form of Adolf Hitler. So it is important. I think some kind of united narrative is oftentimes super important. And then comes social media. Nixters, how you doing? Grandfall, how you doing? Sir Richard, how you doing? And Mr. Toxic, how you doing? There's a certain kind of utility to having a grand narrative and everyone believe this grand narrative. With the advent of social media, the grand narrative starts to go away, because suddenly everyone with a camera and a mic has the ability to become a source of information. And very quickly, we see wars change, right? We already see it with the Second Gulf War. This was, for those of you that don't remember, 2001, 2002, really, when America went into Iraq and Afghanistan. Shortly after that, of course, Facebook would become a thing. And suddenly people started to see at least information that wasn't okayed by the sort of grand scale mainstream media. And you already start to see dissent. You start to see people question. So now for the first time, people can go on Facebook. And while video footage is not that, wildly available and the internet is still in its infancy, it is possible for someone to write, guys, I don't think we should be in Afghanistan, and a lot of other people to go, you know what, I kind of agree with that. So you already see the world becoming a little bit fractured. And then, of course, social media explodes. It becomes everywhere. Now, one of the greatest or one of the most sought after careers for young people is being a YouTuber or being a TikToker. And suddenly, we seem to be incapable of agreeing on anything. Even good ideas are always treated with suspect. So, for example, we might say, you know what, it is a good idea that men shouldn't be competing with women in sports. Almost everyone 20 years ago would agree that's probably a good idea. Now, in the year 2026, there's an argument where people go, well, I don't know about that. Have you considered X, Y, and Z? And it's like, well, I don't have to consider X, Y, and Z. Men should not be competing in women's sports. This seems very obvious to me. But thanks to the internet, we now have the ability to go, well, have you considered, right? And then comes AI. And if you look at what Iran is doing with AI, the enemies of the West are using AI because the West can't really do this. You see, if President Trump's White House used AI footage of the Americans bombing and killing all of the mullahs in Afghanistan, the Western media will have a field day with the White House. They will absolutely destroy President Trump and the White House. But the same sort of standards are not being applied to the enemies of the West. Iran has been using AI left, right, and center. If you look at Iranian AI propaganda, you will see Tel Aviv absolutely bombed to smithereens. You will see thousands upon thousands of bombs dropping all over Israel. You will see hundreds of American soldiers have been killed. This war is, Iran is on the verge of winning this war. When you listen to the Iranian ministers and the way they speak, they're actually now saying things like, we will not make peace. Why would we make peace while we're winning? And it's sort of like, wait, but what do you mean? Why would you make peace while you're winning? We know that you're not winning because we can actually see that you're not winning. We know that you're on the back foot. But remember, they have grasped something that the West knows but can't utilize. The war on social media. I don't have to beat you. I just need to convince everyone else that you're the bad guy. And then I won. That's sort of the big thing that annoys me with Israel-Palestine. How many of you knew? Let me ask this first. Is there anyone in my chat that firmly believes, that Israel committed a genocide in Palestine from October the 7th onwards? Is there any one of you that genuinely believes that Israel committed genocide? I just want to see something. It was bombed and the city was flattened. Hi all, just tuned in. What are you discussing? We're going to be discussing a number of things, but so I have one yes, I have a number of nopes. Carl, how you doing, sir? I'm listening to Amir's channel. He's a very trusted source in Israel. Absolutely not. No. Okay, so most of the people here know that it is bullshit. To the one person that thinks that it was a genocide, and I'm sure that afterwards there'll be plenty more because this is apparently a huge issue for a lot of South Africans. But to the one guy at the moment that thinks that it was a genocide, there's a couple of things that really destroy your argument. So first and foremost, while the war was being waged, Hamas claimed that Israel had killed around 80,000 civilians. They themselves have recently denounced that number because they had to admit that they have lost around 50,000 of their own soldiers. So this suggests, at least in the broad sense, of the 80,000 people that have confirmed lost their lives during that conflict, around 50,000 of those are armed soldiers, not, as it were, suggested civilians. This was Hamas themselves that said this because they had to account for the fact that they are severely diminished in their capacity to actually do anything. So Hamas lost about 50,000. Moreover, when we look at the official statistics from both the the Palestinian sources as well as the Israeli forces, we see that Israel managed to kill one insurgent terrorist for every 2 civilians. Now you might say, whoa, that is insanity. What are you talking about? A 1-on-2 ratio? That is insane. Now 1-on-2 is actually the high point because for most of the war, it was around 1 to 1.4. So 1 terrorist for every 1.4 civilians that they were killing. And you might say, well, that's insane still. Why are you killing so many civilians? Well, if we look throughout the history of war, this is the least bloody war that has ever been fought in the history of the world. Because up until 30 years ago, we couldn't care less about civilians in war. More often than not, during war, civilians was acceptable targets. You were fighting a war. If you had to kill a bunch of civilians in order to get the king to change his mind, that's what armies did. It's only about 30 years ago that we decided, hell no, this is wrong. We shouldn't be fighting war this way. Civilians should be left alone. And if you compare this to what happened in Fallujah, if you compare this to the second and the first and the second Gulf War, you compare this to Vietnam, where the best ratio we've ever had was during the second Gulf War, where we had a 4-to-1 civilian to terrorist ratio. 4-to-1. And this is the nature of fighting in urban areas. When the enemy is hiding amongst civilians, the risk of civilians losing their lives is always going to be greater. That is why most decent armies don't fight among their civilians. They go outside the cities to fight outside the cities so that the civilians aren't being killed. But when you have a genocidal religion and a genocidal group that believes in the heart of their hearts that their citizens should be a shield from Allah against the infidels, you're gonna get civilian deaths. So that's number one. Number two, the sheer numbers of the population doesn't bear out that it's a genocide. There were roughly 2 million people who lived in Gaza before the war started, and there's about 2 million people who live in Gaza now. So what's the genocide? A genocide would suggest that people are dying, right? A genocide would suggest that more people are fleeing than people are staying. Throughout the entire war, you had about 200,000 people that fled the country, and it's about 1.8 million people that is currently living in Gaza. So clearly, if it was a genocide, it wasn't a super successful genocide. The vast majority of Gazans were warned ahead of time that attacks will take place, and this is wartime. So murder numbers or death numbers are going to be higher because it is a war. But none of the evidence actually bears it out. But the Palestinians and the Hamas leadership fully understood the task. Civilians dying was a good thing. They needed civilians to die. This is why they forced civilians to stay in areas where Israel was going to bomb. Why? Because then they can tell the lefties of the world, look at what Israel is doing. Look at all the death that Israel is raining. This was them. They were killing their own civilians in an attempt to be able to propagandize the left. And the left bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Just, oh, good. Great. Because the left already hated Israel. The left already hates the West. It doesn't take much to convince the left that, hey, you know what's great? You should back Iran. This is a regime. I want to show you guys this. Here is Al Jazeera reporting that Iran is busy confiscating hundreds of Starlink devices across the entire Iran. And here you have a freedom fighter of South Africa saying that these terrorist devices should not be allowed in South Africa. Think about what is happening here. The Iranian regime has shut off the internet. Why would any government shut down the internet? The only reason for that is because you're about to do stuff that you don't want the world to know about. Otherwise, there's no need. There's no defensive reason for why you would want to shut down the internet. And now you're also confiscating the devices that people could use in order to tell the world what is actually happening in your country. And yet, the freedom fighters of South Africa have determined that it is the device that is allowing people to speak that's the terrorist device, not the regime that is killing its own people by confiscating these devices. You see, the mindset. This is what propaganda does. This is why you have people like in my chat now saying we stand with Iran. Why? Why would you stand with a regime? Like, I don't care about history. If you want to make the claim as an ANC cadre that the Iranians supported, Nelson Mandela and the ANC during their struggles, even though that's historically completely incorrect, they did not support the ANC. They were trading with the apartheid government all throughout, but never mind that. Even if you wanted to make that claim, surely current actions should speak louder than past ones. If you have a regime now that had killed over 30,000 of their own people less than a month ago, surely that should give you pause to go, wait, that I don't know if I should be standing with this regime. I get that they supported us during apartheid, and that was great of them. But now they are killing tens of thousands of civilians, and I'm not entirely convinced. Well, the reason they're not convinced is AI. You see, the Iranians are running an extensive propaganda campaign. And I do mean extensive, boys. It's insane. When you look at the Iranian embassy in South Africa and the nonsense that the Iranian embassy is spewing. I'll quickly see if I can find this for you. I'm having a religious debate with a bunch of people, so it's pretty much filled up my entire page here. Where is that now? I just want to show you guys the Iranian embassy of South Africa. I mean, the amount of misinformation that the Iranian embassy is spreading all throughout South Africa with impunity. It's actually insane. The Iranian embassy is attacking South Africans. Basically declaring combat on ordinary South Africans. And the government of South Africa is doing absolutely nothing about it. It appears as if the Iranian embassy is allowed to do whatever the hell it wants here. This is the Iranian embassy in South Africa. And when you look at the amount of misinformation that this embassy is allowed to spread all throughout X in South Africa, it's interesting because the Iranian embassy in all other countries doesn't do the same thing. Just here in South Africa, we have this insane push from the Iranian embassy to basically sell the war to the freedom fighters of South Africa, and then of course attack the citizens of this country. You want to talk about a demarche? The ANC decides to demarche and celebrate it. Let me just show you guys this, because this is actually very, very interesting. The Iranian embassy, or the ANC demarches the ambassador of the United States of America. The ANC expels the ambassador of Israel. And yet the ambassador of Iran is able to go to war and indoctrinate ordinary South Africans with impunity, seemingly with the complete backing of the ANC. Listen to Fikile Mbalula. And this is where we're going to shift now to the actual geopolitical conversation here. I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the fear of AI. If we don't get this under control, we're going to end up in a world where we will tear ourselves apart over false and fake stories, right? Just stuff that isn't real at all. But listen to Fikile Mbalula.
And many people questioned and asked, and those who are on the right, why will the president go there? And the president went and delivered the message and came back, even on public transport, not even on Gwazi, and went to America. And some of us were just thinking that he's going to be kidnapped. But we said to President, you must go, even if you get kidnapped, for whatever reason.
At this point, America had not yet kidnapped Maduro. At this point, America had not yet gone to war with Iran. At this point, there was literally no reason to believe that Ramaphosa would be kidnapped. Moreover, it is standard practice all throughout the world. Even the United States criticized Israel for taking out the Hezbollah leaders because the Hezbollah leaders were actually convening in a peace talk. Right? They were all lured into a location as part of a peace talk, and that's where they were bombed. It is common practice throughout the world that we do not attack, diplomats on diplomatic missions. So the idea, this is just propaganda. This is the ANC saying they were afraid that President Ramaphosa was going to get kidnapped because this enables them to play the victim later. America always wanted to attack South Africa. America always had a problem with Ramaphosa. Remember, at this point, Trump is meeting with Ramaphosa, a meeting Ramaphosa requested. Just to be clear, Ramaphosa requested that meeting. Trump didn't invite him to the White House. Ramaphosa requested it. Ramaphosa then also arrived late, so that's a whole different discussion. But fundamentally, there's no threat of Ramaphosa being kidnapped at all. But it needs to be said, because it's all part of the propaganda. This is what the left has left. They just do a lot of propaganda.
So, we shall never cower, comrades. The American ambassador came here drunk a few days ago. And he was demarched by our government.
Listen to what he says. He came here drunk. That is, the ANC likes to talk about dialogue, and they like to talk about decency and how this isn't the way politics should be handled. You can't speak to someone this way or that way. It was the ANC themselves that took great issue with the White House press secretary saying that President Ramaphosa ran his mouth, saying that you don't get to talk about diplomats in that way. And here, Fikile Mbalula says that the ambassador came drunk to South Africa. Why is he drunk? Because he happens to hold a position that 70% of South Africans support. That kill the poor, kill the farmer is, in fact, hate speech. And let's just quickly stop for a second on the whole hate speech debate. And I don't want to hear any freedom fighter argue because you have no standing to do so. We have to get a couple of things straight. In South Africa, the law on hate speech is written that it is determined by the person who hears the speech. So if you say something and what you say offends someone else, that could be deemed hate speech by the courts of South Africa. That's how the law is written. I know because I made a video criticizing the law, saying that that's insanity. You can't have a law where it's as subjective as it depends on what the person who hears it thinks of, the thing that you said, because then anyone could claim, oh, wow, you just criticized me. I found that incredibly undignified, and I feel like my human rights have been hurt, so you're guilty of this, right? You're now a hate speech racist. This is insanity, but never mind. That's the official law of South Africa. It is under that law that it was determined that the old South African flag is a hate symbol. Under the law of hate speech and hate symbology in South Africa, the flag, the old National Party flag of South Africa, was determined hate speech because it hurts the feelings of black people. When they see it, they feel like their dignity has been, their fifis have been hurt. And so the flag is an illegal symbol. You can't fly that flag. Compare that to kill the boer, kill the farmer. Because the flag is the legitimate flag of the old South Africa. It is a symbol of our struggle. As white people, we also struggled during apartheid. We were struggling to keep the communists out of South Africa in the Angola War. That flag is a symbol of our struggle. The courts determined that hell no, that is a hate symbol because it makes black people feel bad. Now, I'll admit, I don't really like the old flag all that much. I don't really care. I don't like our new flag either. I think they're both kind of stupid. But it doesn't matter because for the purposes of the legal conversation here, the same applies no matter how you go about it. So when white people say that song feels like racism to us, when we hear that song, it genuinely sounds as if you guys are calling for the death of white people. Suddenly, now we're told, no. Words have meaning and words have range. And when we say kill the Boer, kill the farmer, we don't really mean kill the Boer, kill the farmer. We actually mean something completely different. And really, you should understand that this is a struggle song. So now suddenly, there's nuances involved. When it's the black people wanting to kill the white people, nuance, there's nuance. But when it's the white people who want to wave a flag, not say the word, the K word, not sing songs about how black people should be killed. No. Just want to wave an old flag. That's hate speech. So when the ambassador said he doesn't care what the courts of South Africa say, it is hate speech. He's not wrong because the courts of South Africa has contradicted themselves. The Constitutional Court of South Africa found that the old flag is a hate symbol because of how it makes black people feel. But the kill the Boer, kill the farmer song isn't hate speech because of how it makes white people feel, because black people feel more strongly that they should be allowed to sing kill white people. So the courts themselves have proven that they cannot be trusted because they cannot be consistent in their own rulings. So the ambassador did literally nothing wrong whatsoever. And yet he was demarched by the ANC. And gleefully so. Here's Fikile Mbalula celebrating that demarchment.
We sent the Israeli ambassador drunk also back to Israel.
Again, celebrating it. Why was the Israeli ambassador sent back? Do you guys know what his crime was? Working with poor communities in the Eastern Cape to allow them access to water. That was his crime. That was the extent of his crime. He was giving water to poor communities, and the ANC was like, you will not help our poor people. We need our poor people to hate Israel. Turks Faye with the 10 community subs. Really appreciate you, sir. Thank you. You are so kind. I really appreciate you, sir. Thank you. That's absolutely fantastic. But it's said, right? It's gleefully said. Now, one has to ask a certain amount of questions when you see your own government acting in this way, when you see the ANC consistently siding with very, very evil regimes, regimes like the Iranians, like the Chinese, like the Russians, you have to ask yourself, what exactly is it? What is the driving force behind all of this? And why is the ANC still incapable of understanding that the world has changed? Because this is a reality that I think the ANC still cannot grasp. The ANC in a recent document, this is literally I think 3 or 4 days ago by Durko, said that the ANC is committed to a multipolar world. Now, I want you guys to understand the equivalent of that would be me saying, I am committed to an ox wagon world. That's the equivalent of it. It's me standing up and saying, I am committed to giving every South African citizen an ox wagon. Who needs an ox wagon? They're no longer in use. no one really wants an ox wagon. So why am I saying it? Well, the only viable reason why I would say such a thing is because I don't know that the ox wagon is no longer in use. I don't understand that the ox wagon is no longer in use. There's an interesting book by Greg Mulls that I started reading a while ago. It's called Why Africa is Poor. Very interesting book. Now, Greg Mulls is he's worked for presidents all over South Africa. It's an incredible read. But one of the arguments that he makes is that Africa at large, the leaders of Africa, is still stuck in the almost early Soviet Union period. And it happens to be an argument that I have made myself, right? Without even reading the book. Because just looking at the world around us, we see an interesting development within the ANC. Like, if you look at the policies of the ANC, they want more. They want land for every single person, right? So they want to give land to all of the black people, but land in a sort of pre-industrialized, agricultural revolution nation makes sense, because prior to this we lived in feudal communities where you pretty much ate what you grew yourself, right? So it made sense that everyone needs to have a piece of land so that they can grow food and actually eat the food that they grow. It doesn't make a lot of sense in a post-industrialized world, because in a post-industrialized world, what value does your land have? Will you ever be able to compete with the large factory farms and corporate farms of the world? No. They can grow more food than you. They can grow it faster than you. They can grow it at higher quality than you, at least on the surface. And so you're never going to be able to compete against that. Right? You're not going to have the skill or the assets to be able to compete. And so they will just always kill you. Moreover, the countries that have tried that, like Zimbabwe, went from being a net exporter of food to a net importer of food. Because as it turns out, it was perfectly viable for an entire civilization to exist when everyone was working on the farms. But since you have a lot of people now living in the cities, no longer farming for themselves, they need to be fed too. And as it turns out, when you have communal farms where people are just sort of farming for themselves, they don't farm enough stuff in order to provide all of the food that the cities need. And so you end up with a situation where you just need to import more food. But the ANC is sort of stuck in that place. They don't understand that land has no value unless you can figure out how to extract the value from the land. So the ANC is sort of stuck in this sort of old school mindset, the pre or early Soviet Union mindset, a mindset that doesn't know that the Industrial Revolution took place, the Agricultural Revolution took place. It just sort of exists in this old school way of thinking. So how is it that South Africa is consistently on the wrong side of history? And the greatest thing was when they said the ANC is committed to a multipolar world. So first, what is a multipolar world? And I realize that for many of you, you might sit there and go, wow, Stefan, are we just going to rehash things that we already know? The answer is yes, because I have to make sure that everyone who follows understands what I'm talking about. If I use something like multipolar world and there's people who don't understand what multipolar means, they're not going to be able to follow the rest of the conversation. So you have a unipolar world, that is when one superpower controls the whole world. You have a bipolar world, this is where you have two superpowers, and then you have a multipolar, this is where you have multiple superpowers that may exercise control over certain areas or maybe on all areas dependent on the sectors that you're looking at. But you effectively have multiple superpowers that play in the same arena. And the ANC it has this idea that the multipolar world is something that they should be committed to. The issue is that would have worked 2 years ago. When Joe Biden was still in office, we did live in a multipolar world. When Joe Biden was still in office, America was one of the superpowers of the world. China was another superpower in the world. And Russia was a third, smaller, yet still superpower in the world. With the actions of President Trump during his first year in office and his actions now, President Trump has confirmed for the world that there is one superpower in the world and a number of other somewhat important countries in the world. What did China and Russia do when President Trump took out one of their allies? Nothing. What did China and Russia do when President Trump took out Iran, another one of their allies? Nothing. What is Russia and China doing now that President Trump is setting his sights on Cuba? Nothing. What did Russia and China do when President Trump decided that South Africa needs to be taught a lesson? Nothing. This is not how superpowers act. Superpowers, when their interests are threatened, react violently. This is how superpowers should react because you should defend your interests. Yet neither of these two supposed superpowers did anything of the sort. And the reason for it is both of these superpowers realize that they don't have the power to face the superpower. They can't match what the Americans are going to bring to the table, and so it's not even worth their time to try. The multipolar world was always an illusion. It was an illusion that was allowed because of international law and international communities that were set up in such a way that it protected weak empires and made them appear a lot stronger. Because, I mean, again, let's be very clear. President Trump is at war with Iran, a member of BRICS. The two guys that were supposed to be the military wings of BRICS aren't there. They're not helping. If you have an alliance, and when your own alliance partners are under attack, your allies do not come to your defense, do you have an alliance? What is the alliance there? Based on what? It can't just be economic, because economics is oftentimes tied to war. So unless you have some kind of military alliance, there really is no alliance. And Russia and China has proven that they're not capable of taking on America. In shorthand, China is America's bitch. And very soon, and I believe that the Chinese understand this, very soon, China will no longer have anything to hoard over the United States. Because America is retaking all of their production as well as their refinement. There's a story that broke, I don't know if you guys saw this, but this story broke about the US considering withholding HIV aid from Zambia unless Zambia extended military mineral access to America. The story itself is completely false, or at least the headline is completely false, because that's not actually why the Americans are upset with the Zambians. If you actually look at why America is considering withholding aid, it comes down to a number of things, and mineral access is just one of them. So the problem is that Zambian officials are allowing Chinese officials to bribe them in order to gain preferential access to mines. This creates a serious problem. America is giving aid to Zambia, and yet whenever American companies want access to Zambian mines, those mines were already promised to the Chinese because of bribes. And so the Americans are saying, you need to sort out your corruption. We are not allowed, under American law, they are not allowed to do business with corrupt countries. So from America's perspective, if you have a bunch of individuals taking money from officials, this is something that America can't stand for. And so America is rightfully saying, look, why should our taxpayers pay for your HIV if you're just going to accept bribes from our enemy? Then you're on your own. There's a number of other problems that America actually has. The mineral access problem, that's a small problem in the larger sense of the word. But fundamentally, this is how superpowers act when their interests are being threatened. They act. They do something about it. China and Russia isn't doing crap. And yet South Africa is committed to a multipolar world. South Africa is effectively committed to the Volkswagen in an era where we have flying cars. The Volkswagen no longer exists. It's no longer a thing that anyone should have to care about. And yet, it seems to be where the ANC is stuck. So in order to understand this, we actually have to go back a little bit. We have to, again, these are conversations that we have had in the past. So I will go briefly over a lot of this, but it's important to understand. So one of the things that I have absolutely loved starting with my political career is when I started making videos, I also started reading a lot. Specifically on geopolitics and politics and books about how political theory works. One of the things that immediately caught my eye in all of the books that I consume is just how much history is involved. It's insane. I'll buy a book about capitalism, and then 90% of the book is history. It's like talking about historical events that happened. And you're like, wait, I'm here to learn about capitalism. Why are you giving me all of this history? Or I'll buy a book about geopolitics, and 99% of it is just history and outlining how history matches. And then it sort of clicks. Geopolitics is it's a science, right? It is an academic study. And in order for geopolitics to be tested, you have to test it. You have to test your theory against historical events. So, for example, if I had a theory that suggested, let's call it fairyism, and I have a geopolitical theory that says that as soon as a country loses half of all of its ferries, that country will start a world war. Now, that's my theory. That's my hypothesis. My hypothesis postulates that as soon as half of the ferries of a country disappears, and ferries disappear for, when people fart too much, there's just not enough ferries, and then they go to civil war. Then they go to world wars. I would now have to test this theory to history. Right? So I would have to go look. What are all the examples throughout history of countries going to war that could be considered world wars? And I identify 5 or 6. And then I say, right, can I identify the number of ferries that this country had 10 years prior to the war and at the time of the war? And then, of course, I find out, well, I don't know how many ferries they had because we can't see ferries. And so I don't know how many ferries they had 10 years prior to the war starting. Therefore, I don't know how many ferries they had at the time of the war starting. And I also don't know how many ferries they have now that the war is over. And so my hypothesis falls apart based on the fact that I can't observe the very crux of my hypothesis in any way, shape, or form. Right? I can't observe anything. I can't say with certainty. So geopolitics is the study of history. And interestingly enough, in this book that I'm reading now, one of the things by Greg Mills, Why Africa is Still Poor, or Why Africa is Poor, one of the things that he actually highlights, and I'll eventually make a video probably on that book alone because it is fascinating. He goes into aid and how aid in Africa has actually led to decimation of African economies. So he actually shows how much money per person economies had prior to receiving any aid, and then like 10 years later, what those countries look like after starting to receive Western aid. And in every single example, Western aid makes countries poorer, not richer. In every single example, countries that receive aid from the West are poorer rather than richer. And by the way, the aid from China has the exact same effect. And it has to do effectively with addiction. Countries that receive aid from international players become addicted to that aid. And so everything is now about that aid. The government relies on that aid in order to do anything, so the government doesn't do anything. It only uses that aid and spends it. So there's like super interesting chapters in the book. But one of the arguments that he actually makes in the book for why Africa is poor and will always be poor is every single African nation. This is actually from another book. The book that I'm referencing now is a book called Coup d'etat. I can't remember the author now, but it's a French author that wrote the book, and he spent like 30 years examining every single coup d'etat that ever took place in Africa. And he came up with this incredible sentence. A country will only ever be free once it has been liberated from its liberators. And the line sounds good until you understand how tragic it really is. You see, in almost all ordinary nations, so in Western nations specifically, you have a cycle of bad government, terrible situations, terrible oppression, revolution, liberation, and then there's a period of good and decent government before it all becomes sort of, again, corrupt, and then revolution, liberation, and then there's a period of peace. In Africa, there is bad times, revolution, liberation, dictatorship, bad time, revolution, liberation, dictatorship, bad times, revolution, liberation, bad time, dictatorship, bad time. Africa does not get a break ever. Throughout all African nations, specifically focusing on sub-Saharan African nations, but even more broadly, the ones in the north, the same thing happens. Africa never catches a break. Every single time Africa liberates itself, it immediately gets a dictator. That dictator immediately starts oppressing its own people, and then the people have a revolution, and then the people liberate themselves, and then a dictator, and then a bad time, and then a revolution. And so Africa's cycle is just endlessly this. It never changes. And there are African nations today in that cycle where the cycle no longer has anything to do with colonial power. The colonies have already been dismantled 50 years ago. So this is not the problem of the West. The West are not the ones creating this problem. This is African dictators killing African dictators in order to oppress its people, and so on and so forth, and it never ends. Why? Well, one of the reasons, and I'm still not done with the book, so I'll be able to, when I do my video on this, there'll be more reasons, but one of the reasons is, again, history. Remember what I said, geopolitics is the study of history. To understand our history, Winston Churchill famously said, the further you look back, the further forward you can look. So you cannot move forward unless you look back. You have to understand your history in order to know where you're going. So that's geopolitics. That's the basis of geopolitics. And he argues it's the chieftain mindset. Throughout African history, all African societies were based on chieftains. So you had the chieftain at the top, and the chieftain could do whatever he wanted. You had a few strong men around the chieftain, and they were also allowed to do whatever they want because they were the strong men protected by the chieftain. And then you had the people existing in service to the chieftain. So the people were never actually free. They were under the rule of the chieftain. And this is how it worked. This is how it always worked. And so what you have in these endless cycles, and why Africans tend not to have a problem with it, is because right now, Cyril Ramaphosa is the chieftain of South Africa. The cadres of the ANC are the ones that's allowed to steal because they're the strongmen of the chieftain. And the majority of Africans, provided that the government leave them alone. Right? So as long as the government leaves them alone, yes, they're poor, yes, they're struggling, yes, they're suffering, but the government isn't oppressing them, not directly. And as long as the government doesn't directly oppress them, you're not going to get a liberation, you're not going to get a revolution, because this is just where they live. Now, this is not unique, by the way, to Africa. This happens in Europe as well. Europe's life cycle just looks a little bit different. So Europe's struggle, if we use the exact same lens, Europe sort of came from a feudal system. Now, in a feudal system, you had the nobleman that was in charge of the land where you lived, but noblemen famously didn't really involve themselves in the goings on of the peasants. The peasants were allowed to do whatever they wanted. The peasants were allowed to do and live whichever way they chose. Provided they pay their taxes, the nobleman would leave them alone. And this is because the nobleman learned very early on, if they involve themselves too much with the peasants rise up and they cause revolutions. So it's better to just leave them alone. They don't upset the peasants because they get very upset. They get very angry. And so this is sort of what the European mindset is. And when you look today, and the kings and the noblemen did whatever they wanted. The king would go to war, the noblemen would join the king to go to war, and the king would expand his empire, and then the king would bankrupt the empire, and the peasants, for the most part, would not care. Because, well, it doesn't really involve them. The soldiers are getting paid to go to war, so they're pretty happy with the money that they got, right? And it's something to do. Yeah, let's go to war. It's something to do. But there's no real interference, there's no real bothering, and so they just sort of exist. And this is where the European Union, the European mind, is more than happy to give all of its power to the European Union, provided that the Union leave them alone, so that they can continue to live, exist, do whatever they want. And the European Union can make all of these big choices and big decisions, doesn't really matter, provided that they don't interfere with their lives. The European Union will eventually interfere with their lives, but the Europeans will have to sort this out for themselves. So every single area of the world have this. You can look at the history of the people, and that will famously tell you exactly what those people will do at any given point in time. Okay. With that entire preamble now out of the way, let's talk about where it all goes wrong. Our story starts with Karl Marx, but I'm not going to give you a full background history of Karl Marx. Most of you would know who he is. He's a man that has caused more suffering in the world than anyone else. I'm actually willing to say, in a world where we are to rank all of the evil people of the world, I would put Karl Marx near the top, if not the very top. Adolf Hitler managed to kill about 7 million Jews and around 20 or so million people more broadly during the war. Karl Marx and his teachings, his philosophies, the body count is somewhere over the 100 million, if not closer to 200 million today. The problem is we don't even know where most of those bodies are buried because communist nations famously don't really care about the individual because of his teaching. So Karl Marx is most likely one of the most evil people that has ever lived. That being said, most of the Western world rejected Karl Marx and his teachings. Even today, there are very few Western people who would openly claim that they are in support of Karl Marx, right? Because they all understand. That's why you nowadays get like neo-communism, where they recognize the flaws of Karl Marx's communism, and so they think they can come up with a better idea. But it all starts. Where should I actually... Let me give you guys first the prevailing, and in my opinion, the most correct geopolitical theory out there. It's called Realpolitik. Those of you that has been at the stream before will know exactly what it is. We've spoken about it many, many times. Realpolitik is a geopolitical theory, and it's widely accepted as one of the most accurate. Realpolitik simply does the following. Realpolitik says that every country will do what is rational for that country to do. That's it. That's the definition of Realpolitik. So if I want to know what a country is going to do, I just need to figure out what is the rational thing for that country to do. And then I will know how that country is going to react to anything that happens. And Realpolitik has a long track record of being correct and being able to call exactly what a country is going to do and how a country is going to react to certain things that happen to them. If I attack that country, they're going to shoot back. Why? Because it's rational for them to shoot back when you attack them. Right? That's just how it works. It's rational. I've shot you, you're going to shoot back. It's rational. It sounds silly, but that's genuinely as simple as it is. So it asks what is rational for a country to do, not what is good. Remember, we're working here in the realm of geopolitics. There is no such thing as good. Henry Kissinger famously said, those who look for morality in the realm of geopolitics, those who look for morality and safety in the realm of geopolitics will receive neither. Henry Kissinger was a really bad guy, but he was a really smart guy. And Henry Kissinger understood there is no such thing as moral decisions on a geopolitical scale. There is only what countries can and what countries cannot do. That's it. And a country must always think about itself before it thinks about anyone else, because for a country, there is no promise of eternity. A country has a limited amount of time on this earth, and if they make the wrong decisions, they stop existing. Therefore, it is incumbent upon a country to make the right decisions. And not right morally, just right for it. So that's realpolitik in a nutshell. What is rational is what a country will ultimately do. Then the 1990s happen. And in the 1990s, specifically in 1992, I believe it was, a man rises onto the scene with a book that would be more influential than many people realized. The man is Francis Fukuyama, and his book is The End of History and the Last Man. Now, I myself have only ever read excerpts from The End of History and the Last Man. It is a book that is on my list to read. I've probably read, let's say, about half of the chapters of the book, but I still want to get the book. But I have so many books that I'm reading about South African history at the moment that I don't have time for another book. I need to first finish these books, and then I'll be able to read that, because it is on my list. It's a genuine must-read for anyone that's interested in geopolitics. But effectively, Francis Fukuyama, in End of History, makes a prediction. His prediction goes as follows. History is over. The battles and the wars of history is over. Now that the Soviet Union has fallen and the Berlin Wall has crumbled, what will happen is globalization will lead to the prosperity of all nations. So nations around the world will get richer as a result of globalization. This increased globalization and interreliance on each other. So because I am reliant on China for my steel, and China is reliant on me for X or for AI, we have no interest in fighting with one another. We have no interest in war with one another, because nations that trade together stay together. This is his hypothesis. His hypothesis is that as countries become more reliant on each other, there will just be less war as a result of this. He further goes on to state that it is incumbent, or it is the baseline of every country in the world, every people in the world rather, to want to be democratic. So in other words, people want to be democratic, but because of financial constraints and economic problems, this often leads to things like dictatorships and authoritarian governments and the like. It is always a result of economics that leads to authoritative governments and fascism and all the rest. So, as everyone gets richer as a result of globalization, and as everyone gets better as a result of inter-reliance on one another, the whole world will just become democratic. Eventually, China will let go of communism and they'll become democratic. Russia will become democratic, and so on and so forth. And it actually looks, in the first few years after the book, as if Francis Fukuyama may have been right. He may have had this right, because Russia is now a democracy. Russia had a democracy for the first 5 years of its post-Soviet Union era. It's rough. There's a lot of criminals and a lot of gangs and a lot of murder and death and chaos, but it is a democracy. China is starting to become part of everything, and everyone's sort of a symbiotic kumbaya. That's a good way of putting it, Merce. It's sort of, yes, we're all singing Kumbaya together because we're all reliant on each other in order to sit next to the fire and sing Kumbaya. But then the first crack in the end of history theory comes with Putin. Putin gets elected to power by the Russian people with one promise: I will stop the chaos. But Putin understands in order to stop the chaos, he needs to become a dictator. The democratic process will not provide him with the power that he needs in order to stop the chaos. And so Putin takes total power. And much to the chagrin of Francis Fukuyama and the Western leaders that now believe in the end of history theory, the Russian people seems okay with this. Seem to have much of a problem with Putin being a dictator. And the reason for this is actually incredibly complicated, and we would have to go into the history of Russia in order to actually understand it. But Konstantin Kisin actually puts this based when he says, for the Russian people, chaos is the one thing that they will not accept. The Russian people, they don't care what form of government they have, provided it does not have chaos. And so dictatorship, that's fine. The Russian people have always had a strongman dictatorship in charge. They're happy with dictatorship, provided there's peace. In Russia, they don't care about war outside of Russia. They just care about in Russia, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, where they live, there must be peace. And that's what Putin does. Putin goes to all of the mob bosses and mafia bosses, and the sort of big, what are they called again in Russia? The big businessmen, the criminal the underground bosses. And he basically gives all of them positions in the government with one promise: you do not corrupt Russia. Neo, take care of yourself, sir. The oligarchs, that's the one. Thank you, Kiklol. Yes, the oligarchs. He goes to all of the oligarchs and he says, hey, boys, I'll give you guys positions in the government. You do not cause chaos here. End of discussion. The Russian people goes back to normal. Everything returns to peace. And Putin is now the president of Russia until he dies, right? The Russian people are happy with this. So Francis Fukuyama's original hypothesis starts to fall apart just a tiny little bit. But it actually goes wrong even worse with China. Because as China gets richer, instead of the Chinese people demanding democracy, the Chinese people seem to be perfectly okay with their communist overlords. In fact, it is the riches of the globalized system that allows the Chinese CCP to enforce ever more control upon its people to the point where its people can no longer speak out. The people are now just slaves of this system. There's nothing that they can do about it, right? But they also don't seem to care much. Now we'll get to why, because this is actually this is where Realpolitik again comes in to save us. Now, at the same time, Fukuyama's book, The End of History and the Lost Man, leads to a new political theory being adopted, geopolitical theory. There's one is called geoeconomics. And remember what I told you? We're going back to Karl Marx. Karl Marx held, and again, this is stuff that you guys would have heard before, but it needs to be said again because I don't know who's new and who has been here for a while. Karl Marx had a centralized thesis. And this is according to James Lindsay, who did phenomenal work in studying Karl Marx and actually wrote a number of papers on Karl Marx. And James Lindsay highlights that Karl Marx's centralized thesis rests on man being the direct result of its economic system. So Karl Marx posits that all humans are socialists by design. When a human being is born, a human being is a socialist. And when human beings live in socialism, they are at their happiest, at their most peaceful, and they have no greed. So humans are perfect in a socialist system. But as soon as you introduce capitalism, that's where greed comes from, that's where murder comes from, that's where rape, all of the bad stuff of the world comes the second you put man in a capitalistic system. And he doesn't call it capitalism, he calls it private ownership. So the second man has the ability to own anything, man will just become greedy and corrupt and start to kill because they want to own more. But if you remove all of that and you remove ownership, man goes back to being this sort of timid, flaccid, peaceful creature that just doesn't want to hurt anyone. That's his central thesis. Now, of course, this is completely devoid of history because that's not what we observe throughout history, but nevertheless, this is what Marx claims. And we have history that proves this. The Soviet Union tried for 80 years to actually get man to this peaceful state of socialism. It never actually happened. The Communist Chinese Party has tried for almost the same amount of time now. It never actually achieved this incredible peace and this incredible non-greed that supposedly should exist in the socialist system. So Karl Marx, just on the face of the evidence available, we know that he was completely wrong in what he asserted, but we can also just do a full-blown deep dive into history to disprove what Karl Marx ultimately said. But geoeconomics takes the work of Karl Marx and then applies it to geopolitics. From Fukuyama's book, The End of History, it now posits that economics is the primary reason for all actions throughout the world. So how does this pertain to South Africa? Iran isn't violent because of the Islamic faith or because of the imams' constant calls for the death of America and the death of Israel. Iran isn't a violent terrorist regime, a country with violent terrorist tendencies because of 12er Shiite beliefs or any of that. Iran is violent because of Western oppression. Because the West has put sanctions on Iran, because the West will not trade with Iran, Iran is violent. That's the centralized theory. Fikile Mbalula, Ramaphosa, all of them hold to this one centralized theory. It has nothing to do with Iran. The blame lies with the West. This explains a lot. Why is South Africa struggling financially? It's not the ANC's fault. You'll hear the ANC, for example, say, Fikile Mbalula says this constantly, it's not the ANC that's corrupt. It's because the ANC cannot be corrupt. The ANC isn't an organization that steals money. Because the ANC is a perfect organization. It's a Marxist organization. What actually corrupted the ANC is other people. This is why Cyril Ramaphosa will stand in front of the entire nation at the State of the Union address, and he will say, or the State of the Nation address, sorry, State of the Union is America, but at the State of the Nation address, and he will say, state looting was this terrible event that happened to South Africa. But it's the ANC that did the state capture. Ramaphosa was the deputy president when state capture was happening. But he speaks as if this isn't something that they did. Right? They didn't do this. This happened to them. Thabo Mbeki goes on a stage at the local conference for the ANC, and he says that Jacob Zuma was in fact an apartheid plant. Jacob Zuma was a spy for the apartheid government. And Jacob Zuma was sent by the apartheid forces to destroy the ANC. This is Thabo Mbeki says this. This is end of last year. That's his assertion. See, because the ANC is a good and trustworthy organization. So when stuff goes wrong, it must be other people that did this to us. It can't be us. We didn't do this. This is why the ANC is so hell-bent hell-bent on antagonizing America because it plays into the worldview. You see, it fits their worldview perfectly. Because now, when South Africa fails, when the economy fails to deliver, when the economy doesn't grow, when people are more unemployed and people get more unhappy, the ANC can point to America and say, look at what they did to us. This is American imperialism that is keeping us poor. Because this is what America is doing to you. We're not doing this. America is doing this. Right? We're desperately trying to save you from the big bad American empire. You need to understand this because history is important. The geopolitics shapes the way people think, shapes the way people react to things. And when you understand the geopolitical leanings of a person, their way of thinking and their sort of their directions of thought become much easier to predict. The ANC fully understands that they are about to destroy the South African economy. They understand this. And it is going to happen. I saw some of you talking about the fuel price. Fuel most likely is going to jump by 3 to 4 rand. And by the way, Esther, thank you. I really appreciate that. I wouldn't say I'm brilliant. I read a lot. And so I have a lot of knowledge. And I just happen to remember a lot of that. But I truly appreciate that. What do you think happens to our economy if the petrol price jumps by 4 rand a liter, guys? I'm an economicus, but the animals are economic too, completely natural, like inequality. Marjorie, again, good point. You're full of good points today, man. I appreciate that. Yes, the chieftain must just see that the poor get some bread, some pop, and he can live in absolute riches. Oh yeah, that's sort of the way it works. Everything goes up. Everything skyrockets. Everything skyrockets. At 4 rand a liter, inflation will most likely go up to about 10%. At 4 rand a liter, that's a massive jump in a very short period of time. And remember, South Africa famously doesn't have railroads. We don't have railway. So all of our goods in this country travels by truck. Trucks use diesel. So if the price for fuel goes up by 3-4 rand, you're looking at astronomical increases in supply. In supply pricing. Astronomical. To the point where most companies will not be able to eat that in the short term. It would bankrupt them if they were to. So we could very easily see where inflation now sits at around 3-4%. We could see inflation easily go to 10%, which would have a devastating effect on the rand. You can already see how the rand is being abandoned. Right? All of the green shoots are disappearing fast. Why? Because the economy is already weakened. And this is sort of how... Have you guys ever had this? Where something goes wrong in your life and then suddenly it's like everything just goes wrong. Like your car tire breaks or your car breaks and suddenly 5 or 6 other things break. Have you ever had this happen to you where you just sort of go, how can this how is this possible? All of the bad stuff just hit at the same time. The answer is that all of the bad stuff was always going to hit at the same time because of your own neglect. There were many things that you were neglecting. And as soon as the one thing broke, it broke everything else. Everything else started to go wrong. But they were already going to go wrong because of the neglect that you yourself have enacted. right? Because you didn't maintain your car enough. You had the fuel injectors go, and the fuel injectors broke the carburetor. I don't know shit about cars, so please don't go, man, the fuel injectors would never break the carburetor. I don't even know what a carburetor is. I'm just saying, right? I'm just using words that I've heard before. I know nothing about cars. But the one thing breaks, and then the other thing breaks, and then another thing breaks, and you go, how is this possible? Well, it happened because you serviced your car in the 1980s for the last time. So all that was needed was one thing to go for everything else to follow. I don't even think fuel injectors was a thing in the 1980s. So just, I think I know at least as much enough about that, right? So fundamentally, it's an avalanche that happens, and you notice the first one, and then everything else that follows is your own fault. But because it all happens at the same time, you just feel like this is really unfortunate. This is how economies come to an end. Because by the time the catastrophe hits, the foundations are so weak and have been eroded so much that there's nothing left to keep up the economy. And I'm willing to bet that at 4 Rand a liter, and it might even go higher than that, guys. It might even go higher than that. Because I don't think we're near the end of this war. And I think we could easily see $140, maybe even $150 a barrel. Because there are actual reasons why President Trump wants $150 a barrel. This might not be fun for Americans, and I fully understand this. This isn't fun for the rest of the world either. But from America's geopolitical perspective, $150 a barrel is phenomenal. It's amazing. Because at 150 dollars a barrel, China goes bankrupt. China dies at $150 a barrel. Their economy cannot absorb that amount for oil, especially once it loses Venezuela and Iran, which it already is. Right? So keep that in mind, because this is important stuff. From Trump's perspective, right now, high oil prices is really good, like really good, because it hurts China. And if it can continue to hurt China, that's a good thing. It's not lost on me that President Trump was on a call with President Putin, and an hour later, President Trump announced that they're going to lift some of the sanctions on Russia. And I would not be surprised if President Putin said to him, hey, you give me the ability to move my oil, I'll bankrupt China. Because China has been trying to bankrupt Russia. Because of Russian sanctions, China was the only one to sell military equipment to Russia, and China was selling it at an 80% up market. Right? So they were marking it up 80%. They were selling it at almost double the ordinary price. And so, as you can imagine, Russia wouldn't mind sticking it to China and getting some of their money back. So Russia is having a good time. And yeah, Russia and China has never been friends. It should be made very, very clear. In a world where there are no other enemies to fight, Russia and China will fight each other immediately. Because they have always been enemies, because they're so close together, and you cannot have two superpowers on the same continent. It just does not work. They're going to go to war at some point. So it might just be that Russia is taking this as a great opportunity to get some of their money back. And if it hurts China in the process, that's just the price of doing business. So I wouldn't even be surprised. But that goes into a deeper theory that I have, where I think President Trump is using Russia in order to... I think President Trump wants to pull Russia towards the Western side. And even if that fails, he just wants to get Russia in a position where Russia can scare the living hell out of the Europeans. And sorry, guys, if I'm working with my ear here, I have to literally go to the pharmacy after the stream. My ear is completely blocked. I don't know why, but it's super annoying. I've been hearing a for like the last week. It's very tiny. It's just right here in the back. It sounds as if there's like some kind of white noise right here at the back. It's completely blocked. I don't know why. But yeah, so that's sort of my real thoughts at the moment is if we go to 4 rand, 4 rand 50 a liter increase, this economy crumbles. And it could go to 6 rand. It could go to 10 rand extra per liter, guys. That's not unheard of for fuel to jump that much. What do you think happens to this economy when that happens? We don't have much. We don't have that much leeway. Thanks to a very bad government that has spent the last 30 years hollowing out the literal economy of this country, should that happen, this economy comes crashing down. Most people won't be able to afford the things that they need to survive. And that will then lead to large-scale revolution, and unrest within the country. We could probably see the Durban protests or the riots that happened in Durban. We will probably see more of those break out. So that's my prediction. If the oil price continues to climb, and right now it doesn't appear like there's any real stop to it, but if the oil price continues to climb in the way that it is, I have a reasonable expectation that the South African economy doesn't survive this. Um, Amanda, I don't think so. I've had this before, and it usually I just need my ears I don't know what you call it, spade at 8. It's a wax buildup, and it started happening when I moved to the Western Cape. So I never had this, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, when I moved to the Western Cape, this happens every 2 years or so. I think there's just a lot more foreign pollen in the air, and this triggers my allergies, and so the ears just completely close up. So I have to go in and I have to, just clean it out. It's better than mainstream media. This is where there's independent journalism. Ravi, absolutely true. So, do you guys have anything that you want to add? Anything that you want to disagree with? Anything that I didn't discuss that you feel like we should be discussing? We watch Stefan's live feed. Most of us are. Carl, I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Ja, jy is reg. Peter is klaar hier om nou nog te betaal. Gaan ons seermaak. Absolutely, Yaku. In a sense, I don't mind if the price rises more. This is hurting my government, Australia, locally, and exposing their incompetence. Optimal Toast, I think a lot of people feel the same. A lot of people are sort of, I wouldn't say gleefully hoping for the downfall of their own governments, but they are kind of hoping for the downfall of their own governments, right? Because a lot of us have seen the terrible things that our governments have been doing, and we've been wanting our governments to wake up, right? I reject both atomizing liberalism and socialism. Caleb, probably a good place to start. Cielig. Carl, you think the ocean air could be the only reason that this is happening? Because it's terribly annoying. Rather go to an audiologist and an ear specialist instead of straight to the pharmacy from a guy with a ton of ear issues. Rather be safe than sorry. Matty, so what I will do is, and this has been my thing because I've now had my ears cleaned out. Maybe I did have when I was a child, I had a problem with ear infections a lot. So I eventually had to have little tubes installed in my ear just to help my ears drain. So I probably have, in general, a bit of drainage problems in my ears. So that is a thing. Albert, thank you so much for the 70 Rand donation. I truly appreciate you. Thank you, sir. You're far too kind. Nicholas with a 35 Rand donation. Really appreciate you, sir. You're far too kind. The faster the chaos comes in SA, the better. Nicholas, I think you're not alone on that. And Albert, I truly appreciate you being my number one fan. Thank you very much for that. I love your work. Thank you. It's truly humbling to know that what I'm doing brings value to you guys. So thank you so much for that. But I had this as a child, Matty, so I think my ears are just in general bad. But my sort of go-to is when I go to the pharmacy, when they sort of clean out my ears, I always say, if it doesn't get better, I will go to I will go to an ear specialist. But every single time thus far, it's gotten better, right? So as soon as they clean out the ears, it's perfect. I no longer have those problems. So I would argue that it's probably just more of that, and I can sort of feel as it's happening. It was at first just a bit of a sound in the back of my ear, and slowly but surely I could start to feel the ears being blocked up a little, and now the ears are such that when I equalize, so when I try to equalize, there's a clear blocking ear. Like I can feel that it is now blocked. Um, so now I know I have to go clean out the ear. So hopefully I've done it soon enough that it I don't first, because the last time I wanted to go, the wax was too stuck. So I first had to do these ear drops for 4 days, and then they can only clean it out. But it's because I left it for a long time. So I'm hoping that now I go soon enough that they can just immediately wash it out. I don't have to worry about nonsense. Do you think Cupcake has nightmares about Delta Force helicopter extraction? No, I don't. I don't think so. Personally, I hate to say this because I don't want to speak ill of people, but I don't think he's smart enough to even think that that would happen. I genuinely think all of the smart people of the ANC has already left the ANC. They're either dead or no longer part of the organization. And so what you have now is just a bunch of captured cadres that's running the. So I don't think Cyril even knows enough to. I don't think Cyril knows enough to even be afraid of what might happen. I mean, if we just look at how Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC has handled the changing of the world order, you have so many governments that are waking up, even European governments. I was watching this. Let me see if I can find this for you guys quickly. I was watching this talk by the president of Finland yesterday. Actually, quite a good guy. I like him. Um, so this guy.
Flexible integration. Well, the clear observation is to say that.
I mean, he's a European leader, right? He's the leader. He's the president of Finland, and even Europe has realized. Europe, one of the most left-wing continents in the world, has realized that the world has changed. The old politics no longer works. He, by the way, in this speech starts by saying that he was a firm believer in the end of history theory, and he has to admit that he was completely wrong. The end of history never actually made sense, but it took them a long time to realize it. So Europe has realized you need to change your approach to America. So too has China and Russia have realized that there's a new way of thinking about stuff. The only people that have seemingly not yet realized it is South Africa. The ANC seems completely oblivious to what would be required for them to actually fix the country. Completely oblivious to it. And this means we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What even is the point? Right? All we can do now is wait for these guys to implode, I would say. But okay, guys, I'm going to go quickly to the pharmacy to spray out this ear. Hopefully get it cleaned out before tomorrow because it's super annoying. Ordinarily, we go a little bit longer. I like to do about 2 hours a day. So I understand that I'm leaving you guys high and dry with probably some of you another hour left on your lunch break. I apologize for that. But this ear needs to be sprayed out now. It's driving me insane. Listening to this constantly, it's killing me. So let me just quickly video studio. How you doing, bro? When Mandela spoke to the world, he said how wonderful South Africa was going to be. Was he lying, or the ANC under Cyril are inept, or are they? No. So video when when Nelson Mandela was saying this, It was a combination of ignorance and arrogance. Nelson Mandela knew nothing of running a country. Nelson Mandela, furthermore, had no idea just how bad communism actually was as a governmental force. So Nelson Mandela's promises were just ignorance. The man wasn't equipped to make that kind of statement. I mean, he also famously said that the National Party was corrupt and that the ANC would not be corrupt. And then, what the hell are you even talking about, right? B, I'm from South Africa. B, well, I'm from South Africa. My accent, I realize, isn't South African. It doesn't sound South African, at least. Don't know what it sounds like, because everyone has a different theory on which country I actually come from. But I was born and raised right here in South Africa. I was born in Polokwane, raised in Polokwane until the age of 18, went to the UK for a year and a bit, almost 2 years. Went to the UK, came back from the UK, was in Polokwane for another year, then went to university to study. And when I was done at university, I went to Pretoria to study. Then I went back to Polokwane, where I lived for 7 years or something. And then I moved to Pretoria, lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and then moved to Cape Town. Sound Scandinavian. You see, some people think I sound American, which I don't think I do. I think the only thing that sounds American from my accent is my R's. I tend to have the similar kind of roll to my R's, I think. But yeah, gotta admit, your accent is not as strong as it could be. I work with an Afrikaans guy with a very similar accent. I think it's just because, because I hang out with a lot of Americans and I hang out with a lot of Europeans. The accent just gets influenced a lot more. So I don't have the neutral South African accent or the Cape Townian accent or the Joburg accent, luckily, because I hate the Joburg accent. No, I hate it, but it's a very, it's like a very accent. Joburg, although Joburg is not as bad as KwaZulu-Natal. Though both of them say brew, so I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, guys. I'm from Pretoria. It's sort of ingrained in me. I have to hate the people from Joburg because, Blue Bulls, Lions. I don't have a choice. It's just how it works. What does anybody care about SA? Seriously, these idiots ruined their country and ran out of white people to blame. Well, some of us still live here, so some of us still care about this country because we live here and we kind of like it here. How's my China? You look very nice. Thank you very much, Matty. Really appreciate you. But yes, that's how they speak, and I hate it. No, brew. Like, brew. Come on, brew. You have to understand, brew. Do you understand what I'm saying, brew? And it's like, man, just stop saying brew. I'm not your brew. Just call me by my name or shut the hell up. I hate that accent, dude. Like, it drives me insane. I would say probably the nicest English accent in South Africa is the Cape Townian one. The Cape Townian accent is pretty neutral. They have like a pretty nice English accent. The Polokwane one is basically just broken English because there's very few English people that live there. The Pretoria one, it's okay. It's also pretty neutral. It's not too bad. Like I said, Joburg has a very unique accent and it can drive me insane. KwaZulu-Natal, same. I don't think I've ever heard a person from the Free State speak English. So I don't think they have an English accent. Yeah. The people in Pretoria speak with a Blue Bull accent. Northern Cape English accent is non-existent. I don't even know what that would sound like because I remember when I was driving through the Northern Cape, pretty much everyone was speaking Afrikaans. Like all of the coloreds, the black people, everyone was speaking Afrikaans. So I have no idea. They cannot speak English. Oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's the same as in Polokwane in Pietersburg. Most of the South Africans I've met are from Joburg. That's my point of reference. Yeah, please don't think that Joburgers is an accurate representation of South Africans. So there's a couple of things you have to know about the people of Joburg. First, overwhelming majority of them are far left nutcases. Like Joburg is probably the most leftist city in South Africa, with Cape Town a close second. Like specifically the southern suburbs of Cape Town. So also never look at the southern suburbs of Cape Town and think that is indicative of the people of Cape Town. the people on the other side of the Boerewoordsgordijn, they're not like the southern suburbs. So they try to be super woke as well. But like Joburg is insanely leftist and woke. And I would argue that if it was possible, Joburgers would probably have the largest disconnect to the rest of South Africa. And this is generalization, right? So I have people who are friends of mine in Joburg who hate the lefties, hate people in Joburg. So we are talking more generally. We're not talking about the individuals themselves, because you do get incredible people from Joburg. But yeah, it's a very leftist city. Speak English as deliciously as I can. Hey, if you can at least speak to the point where I can understand, I'm perfectly happy. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me go to the pharmacy. I love you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you so much to everyone that donated. Thank you so much to everyone, to Turk's Faye for the 10 community subs. I really appreciate you. We'll be back tomorrow with another stream, also more videos. All of that will be tomorrow. I really appreciate all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, from the bottom of my heart, take care of yourselves. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. And I will see all of you in the next one. Peace. And yes, I know some people think that this is the wrong way around for peace, but I don't agree. I think this is the right way around for peace, so that's how I say peace. Lamborghini with the 70 round right at the end of the stream. Really appreciate you, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll see all of you later. Cheers, my bro. Matty. Screw you, bro.